Welcome to the Laws of Style, featuring conversations on creativity, fashion, and the law from the leading edge of our economy and culture. Hosted by noted fashion lawyer Douglas Hand.
Welcome to the podcast, The Laws of Style. Downloading to you from the work from home offices of HBA, the fashion law firm. I'm your host, Douglas Hand, fashion lawyer, fashion law professor. I'm joined today by menswear designer and good friend, David Hart. David, thanks for joining.
My pleasure. Great to be here.
Yeah, well, so, this is the new. We are, we're podcasting from my offices by Central Park, but where are you zooming in from?
So I'm right outside the Navy Yard in Brooklyn.
For our listeners who may not know, your early upbringing in Maryland and your early design work, you got started really early. When exactly did you first start designing?
So I took a home economics sewing class. I was about 16 years old. I was really interested in the craft of sewing and the art form of it. And it was something that I really fell in love with. And by my senior year, I was making prom dresses for all of my friends. And I actually submit a portfolio to the Fashion Group International, and I won a scholarship that I used to go to FIT here in New York. And that was 20 years ago.
Yeah, time flies, doesn't it? Well, so FIT, you're one of our proud alums, along with Michael Kors and Calvin Klein and many others. What was that experience like as technical training? And now you are a professor there, so
Yes.
Maybe you can talk about what changes you see, just given 20 years ago versus today, the way that you were trained and the way that maybe you're training today.
Sure. I know you just mentioned I'm teaching two classes there. In the menswear department, I teach advanced portfolio. So I'm helping the kids put their portfolio together and build collections. The thing that really hasn't changed with the program is just the intensity and the rigor of it. It's so technical. You come in, you learn how to sew, you learn drafting, pattern making, grading, and now there's a big push for computer-aided design, for 3D rendering.
Right.
The technology aspect is so incredible, and just how fast the industry is progressing. We're doing a lot with like web PDM and developing collections digitally, which is really perfect for the time we're living in.
Well, after graduation, you had some great gigs with large companies, but also small companies. You started with one of HBA's clients, Anna Sui,
Yes,
and then moved on to some of the really big household names in American fashion, with Ralph Lauren and Calvin Klein. Maybe talk about the difference between working for the more nimble and kind of broader work that you had to do while at Anna Sui versus
yes.
Ralph and Calvin, which are huge enterprises, obviously. And I imagine your work there was quite a bit narrower.
Yes. So, it really is interesting. I mean, one thing that I'm really thankful for is that my first job out of school was with Anna Sui, because it was working with a very established global brand that still operated on a smaller scale. So I was directly working with Anna, which really was the best experience that a young designer can have. And, right out of school, I was also working with all of the different departments. So we were working with the pattern makers. There was an in-house atelier, sales, production. That was an experience that really is unrivaled by any type of experience you'll get going to a bigger company like Tommy or Ralph or Calvin, where most of what I was doing was working on tech packs. So like, those jobs were very specialized, focused on one category. And, it's very different. It's a very merchandise driven business. So you don't necessarily work on as many categories, and you don't have as much going on as you do in a smaller house.
Well, so '09, you launched what you started where Ralph started. You
Yes.
launched the neckwear line. What was the thinking behind that? And maybe let's just use that as a way to describe and discuss kind of the current state of menswear and neckwear in particular, as many have kind of prognosticated that is a dying business.
Yeah. Well, sure. I mean, that was such an interesting time for menswear. And my thinking behind that was really, all of my experience up to that point was in women's wear. And I thought more interesting things were happening in menswear at the time. And because my corporate experience was all in women's, I was interviewing, trying to get jobs in menswear, but no one would hire me. Because they're like, well, you do women's, you don't do men's. So I decided to start out on my own with something small with neckwear. And, that was such an interesting time for neckwear because, everything was this like heavy woven silk. And I saw that there was an opportunity to bring in these more novelty fabrics like wools and tartans and shirting fabrics, just knit ties coming back, slimming the ties down. And, it was really exciting because our first account was Bergdorf Goodman and it sold out really quickly. So the tie business kind of gradually snowballed into the full collection that I'm continuing to work on now.
Right. So that was 2013, 2012, roughly, that you started with the full collection.
Yes.
And how has that evolved from tailored clothing offerings early? Quite a bit of recognition, I think, in formal wear, which is, you've put me in tuxedos, which we'll throw some shots of us together at CFDA Awards and other places, but your tuxedos are magnificent.
Oh, thank you.
To today, where obviously tailored clothing is an area that is evolving and getting more casual, and you with that have evolved and offered really some pretty notable knits.
Yes. Yeah, we've started to layer a lot more sportswear into the collection. We've had a lot of success with fine gauge knitwear that we're making in Italy, but still the big bulk of the business is formal wear and tuxedos, which is fantastic because people are always getting married, so they're always coming to us for tuxedos for weddings, which is really interesting. And going back to tailored clothing, we keep hearing like, oh, the suit is dead, but I never think the suit will really be dead. I think it's just evolving. And, if just the industry, it's very circular. So it comes back around. And, the challenge for any designer, I think, is just waiting for that circle to come back around to the point where, your business is having a moment.
There's some commentary that formal wear and formal dressing, once there is an end to the type of social distancing we're seeing today, will come kind of roaring back because people are kind of sick of sitting around in their sweats all day and only dressing perhaps from the waist up, although I assure you I have pants and shoes on. Don't know about you. What do you think about that? Eric Jennings was one such commentator in that article, and others kind of surmising that this would actually see an uptick whenever we get sort of back out and about.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it going either way. I think people have been so used to now living for the past month and a half with the bare minimum. So, I think people are going to start making more educated purchases. It'll be less excessive buying. But what I feel like people will start doing is just buying better quality, investing in pieces and having a more minimal wardrobe full of classics and things that they can wear. One thing that a lot of people have been talking about is like developing a uniform, even if it's for work from home. And I think that's something that will spill out into daily life. And, to your question about if there will be this big boom and people wanting to dress up and go out again, I think absolutely. I mean, I think we're going to be seeing a lot more events. I think guys really will be excited about dressing up again, and everyone will be excited about getting rid of the sweats and you know, putting on a great tuxedo or some great streetwear or sportswear, whatever they've been looking at online and on television during their time at home.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you've won a lot of awards. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You were a finalist in the CFDA Vogue Fashion Fund.
Yes.
You were named Best New Menswear Designer of America by GQ. Council of Fashion Designer of America inductee in 2015. What do you think about sort of the game show element?
You know, I think it was great for me personally. I mean, it really opened up my network and put me in with a circle of industry professionals and other designers. That's really helped me develop kind of a support group. You know, I feel like I made lifelong friends with some of the designers that I was in the Vogue Fashion Fund with, and we all keep in touch. We all talk. So that aspect is really fantastic. And you know, the great thing about, you know, all of the awards and CFDAs, it really is a community. You know, I feel like everyone's been so supportive, especially during COVID times. People are making masks. People are reaching out about, you know, where they are with business loans, with strategies to move forward once things start to open up. And, you know, if I wouldn't have been a part of these programs, I wouldn't have had access to that community. So, you know, I think it's really an interesting time. And, you know, going back to how big the fashion industry is, it isn't just about us as designers. It employs so many retail workers around the world, factory workers, people that you don't see that work behind the scenes. And, you know, one thing that I'm hopeful for is, you know, that these times with COVID, it'll really give a face and a story to a lot of those people who are often overlooked.
Yeah, well, that's a great point, David. I mean, there is a massive trickle down effect, right, of the inability for people to go shop and purchase. The front lines of that are obviously the retailers, but that hits the brands, and that ultimately hits the factory workers, the garment workers, and they are really the least able to absorb it when you consider that a lot of garment workers subsist on $2 a day. I mean, they are notoriously underpaid, overworked, and we're seeing that. And I think those stories should come out. I think that may well change people's buying habits post-COVID, or I don't know that there's a post-COVID, but you know, once we are back into a more normal routine, and that is a good thing. This is an opportunity industry-wide to shed a light on that. And I think consumers do want to know. Transparency has been one of the big issues in the industry. Are there things you do through your brand to increase that transparency?
Sure. I mean, one thing that the brand has always been committed to is working with the best factories, with the best conditions. And, you know, unfortunately, it reflects in our price. You know, like we do get pushback from people like, why is this so expensive? But once you explain that, you know, you're working with factories here in New York City and the garment district in New Jersey and Italy, and, you know, all of these workers are being treated fairly, they're getting good wages, and the quality of the work they're doing is fantastic, you know, people really start to understand that price. I mean, I'm sure we've all seen it. People are so dismissive of designer brands because they think there's this kind of inflation in the price, and a lot of times it is just the materials and the craft and the workmanship. Right. And you know, that's something that the brands, in my opinion, need to be a little more eloquent in how they're passing that information on to customers and the general public.
For sure. And the fact that we don't need that much. Back to your uniform point, and that work for home may also increase people's comfort level appearing pretty similar, throughout the week, as opposed to really peacocking and having completely different outfits and feeling like, oh, I was Instagrammed in that, I can never wear it again.
Right.
Hopefully that's a thing of the past, because as you and I both know, upwards of 70% of most newly produced garments wind up burned or in the planet. And that's not a sustainable practice.
Well, also just adding on to that, I mean, I think there's going to be this huge resurgence and just great vintage clothing that people will be seeking out to add into their wardrobe. I mean, going beyond just the real and grailed and the secondary market, we're seeing so many garments that are just becoming collector's items, and people are going crazy bidding for these on auctions. I mean, there's Margiela auctions now at Sotheby's and Christie's, and
that's a great thing, because obviously the most sustainable practice is just not to make something new at all. And I also think it's a great indicia of someone's ability to put together vintage pieces and find them. That is that's a nice hallmark of style, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, so getting a little legal on the laws of style, as we do. David Hart is the man, is the brand. So you chose to name your company and your brand after yourself. I know you and I have spoken on panels about this. What went into that decision, and has it presented any challenges for you, whether through licensing the trademark or financing the company?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I thought the name was great. I mean, I'm impartial to it, but I always had this idea of having the brand named after me. But of course, it presents trouble. I mean, I know so many designers that have ended up losing their name, that have gotten into bad deals and taken investments that didn't really pan out, and then they were unable to use their name because someone else had owned a big part of the company and they were barred from using it. So it's something that we always have to be careful about as designers, like who we're working with, who we're getting into deals with, and also just protecting the name and the integrity of the brand.
Yeah, for sure. It's obviously almost a default for many designers, like artists, to use their own name. It clearly indicates authenticity, but it does present potential problems if you're in a position like, say, Joseph Aboud has been in a couple of times of selling his company, and then wanting to continue to design, still being a vital, active designer and wanting to do that, but clearly, for consumers, that presents some confusion when, Jill Sander is a woman and designs for some other house, and there is a Jill Sander brand that she's not designing for, and that's but one example. Two maybe more personal questions. I know you've always been inspired by some of the great photographers, and you're a modest collector. I think you've got some nice pieces. Talk to me about that, how that love developed, and does it inform your design in any way?
Of course. I was always exposed to photography from a young age, and, my first memory of it is my grandfather was an avid vernacular photographer who documented family life after coming back from the war, even during World War II, and then coming back, starting a family, and he had everything organized by year with slides. And one of the favorite things that I would do when I visited New York as a child would be looking at slides with my grandfather and just being fascinated by all of the slides. They were shot on chrome back then, so the colors were hyper saturated and everything looked like candy, and it was just kind of this bright, colorful world that you could be encapsulated by. So that was really exciting. And then, as I developed my interest in fashion, looking at Vogue and Harper's Bazaar and W, you get access to some of the greatest artists that were working with these magazines like Richard Avedon and Irving Penn, and even going back further to people like Lisette Modell, all of these great New York school photographers. And it always fascinated me that there was this push-pull between like art and commerce with photography, where these were fashion photographs, but they were also being considered fine art by collectors. And the aspect of just visual storytelling was amazing. And they were working with people like Alexei Brodovich, who was an amazing art director, and Dr. Agha was at Vogue, and he developed the first like full page spread, taking a photograph and filling the whole page with it. And that was so radical at the time. So, it's interesting because, the publications had this ability to really bring in these artists and do something radical at the time. And that's why they're still such important cultural elements to us today.
For sure. So with publishing, not yet dead, but really crawling maybe into its own grave that it dug for itself. What are the opportunities you see for visual storytelling for brands today, and how do you go about doing it?
Sure. Every brand has a story to tell. And one thing that's so important to me is just storytelling. And, one great thing about being a brand is you get to kind of build your little team of creatives. So you get to work with amazing photographers, product stylists, hair and makeup people, and everyone puts together their little crew. And then I feel like there are like editors and writers and buyers that also really support and nurture that vision. So it really is always about storytelling.
Because most of those people and organizations are an amalgam of independent contractors, right? We know that, but perhaps the world doesn't know that a brand often engages 8 different consulting firms or consultants to really put an image out there or a campaign. During the COVID relief attempts, a lot of those people have had a real struggle in getting unemployment for some, in getting payroll protection if they're small firms. What are your thoughts on that sort of macro, and how did David Hart, the company, address that during this time?
I mean, it's been a struggle for us. I mean, we've applied for both the payroll protection and the EIDL loans, and we haven't gotten either. And, we keep hearing that the funds for the second round now will probably be gone today or tomorrow. And today is 1st of May.
If you're comfortable mentioning, I mean, what bank did you submit it through?
I submit through TD.
Okay.
Bank, and then the EIDL is just right through the SBA, and
right.
We haven't heard anything back. So I don't know. We're staying hopeful. We applied for the CFDA Common Thread, and there's also an artist relief grant that I applied for. So we'll see. I'm not the only one in this boat. I mean, obviously, I'm in touch with many of my other colleagues, designers, and they've all applied, and I don't know that any of them have received it. So we're all...
Well, the other thing really pinching people is exposure to wholesale account bankruptcies. And here, COVID coming right after the Barney's bankruptcy and absolutely demolishing, I think, any chance for Neiman Marcus to emerge without going into bankruptcy. As of the date of this recording, they haven't filed, but they will once this goes live, I'm sure. Have you been exposed to any of those situations where you've got accounts receivable with what used to be a large and very steady payer, and now, because they're in bankruptcy, your pre-petition accounts receivable is behind essentially every creditor that is owed significant sums ahead of you?
I've been fortunate that, we got some of this, like all of the spring orders were shipped early. So we got all of our payables, but now fall, I mean, we're not able to produce anything. So that will probably just be put on hold until things open up. What I'm hoping is to really focus on direct to consumer moving forward. And as soon as things open up, just have some orders ready to give to our factories so they can get back to work and they can have some revenue coming in. And, that's really what I can hope for. But yeah, going back to what you said, I mean, I've heard horror stories of people that shipped hundreds of thousands of dollars of orders, and the accounts are either canceling orders, not accepting them, returning them, or not paying. And, a lot of smaller brands that will just put them out of business because, that's the money that we rely on to pay our factories and then to create the next season. So
maybe on to how you're dealing with, being cooped up and, what your day is like. And as a creative professional, I imagine there can be some real challenges being somewhat in the same space all the time.
Yeah. I've been spending probably too much time on social media, but more so just trying to keep our clients and our customers engaged and letting them know, hey, like, I'm not trying to push any product on you guys now during this time, but we're here for you if you need something, and just letting them know that, when we get back to work, like, we'll have new product, we'll be here for them. Also, I've had a fantastic opportunity to kind of dive back into some research and start looking at some of the books that I have here that I haven't had a ton of time to look at, and hopefully have some great collections like planned out once things open up again.
Yeah, it's been interesting to actually look at your shelves, right?
Yeah.
For so many of us, it's just decor in the apartment. Most of us love books, but it's been nice to take them off the shelf and reread many of them.
Absolutely.
For sure. How about when you do venture out and you mask up? Obviously, safety is the first and foremost importance there, but do you have any tips to the extent people want to do that in a way that might look better or be somewhat stylish while assuring that what they're doing is CDC compliant as much as it can be?
Yeah, sure. I mean, going to your point, like safety first. So also, if you have the N95 masks, you should donate them or leave them for essential workers. But the great thing about menswear and some of the shirting fabric, especially coming out of Italy, like Albini and Alumo, like these fabrics are in such high thread counts. They would be great for making masks out of that you could match to your shirt. So when you're at your shirt maker, you could have them make a mask, and then it also just reduces waste as well. So instead of throwing out, the scraps or whatever's left over, you can have a really high thread count mask that goes back to, your outfit and shows a little bit of your personal style.
Yeah, for sure. I've been dabbling with trying to convert some of my old dress shirts in that way, but less matching them. I guess I'm of the mind that I want a little differentiation between my mask and, we're in uncharted style territory for sure. But
Yeah.
I view it maybe a little bit more as an accessory, as maybe you'd view the tie or the pocket square and want some.
I think we're going to see a big new market come out of this. I mean, I don't want to say it's unfortunate. I mean, it's great. And, it's great that people will start to take it seriously and try to be safe. But, I guess it's the reality that we're living in now.
So what other menswear brands do you appreciate or gravitate to or get inspired by?
Sure. I always feel like I look to more of the European houses. And for me, I really love what Eddie Slimane is doing at Celine Men's. I feel like I get all of his references. It's kind of like this 80s interpretation, like the 80s synthwave interpretation of the 60s,
Yeah.
these great 70s references. And I really love how he has looked back to the original DNA of the brand and reissued a lot of the styles in a new way. I also really like what Daniel Lee has done at Bottega Veneta, this kind of minimal tailoring. I think it's really cool, and I think it's the direction that a lot of menswear will be moving in, more of like a minimalism, like kind of 90s Jill Sander, that kind of mood.
As far as unisex, which pre-pandemic was an emerging category, with some brands fully dedicated to that statement that we are a unisex brand, and there is no divide, there is no line. Do you think there's a future in that? And do you think, in some ways, oddly, the time that we are housebound is good for that business?
I personally think that is the future. I think we're going to see just genderless department stores. People will just wear whatever they want to wear. I mean, so many of my clients are women. They just want like a great fitting suit, and they can't find that in a women's department. They want something with more structure that works better for them and their lifestyle. So, I think, the one thing I'd say is I feel like when we hear about like genderless dressing, we don't really hear as much about the women's aspect of that. So, it's definitely an interesting time for people to experiment with their wardrobes and think about, less gender conforming restrictions in terms to how they're dressing.
Yeah, women in tuxedos is a personal favorite.
Yeah,
I think they look great. When speaking of tuxedos, do you have any? I know for select people, you have made tuxedos. Anything right now on order, or is that business right now just absolutely dead?
Well, we have some weddings that were coming up that have now been postponed, but we have a couple in our shop now waiting for fittings that would have been happening this summer, but now they've been postponed until next year. So we're just kind of waiting for things to open back up so we can get back to work. And everyone's been really understanding. I think everyone is just having more compassion for each other in general.
Yeah. Well, David, that's a wrap. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, I look forward to not socially distancing with you very, very soon.
Thank you.
All right, bye, everybody.
You've been listening to The Laws of Style with Douglas Hand. For more information, go to our website at www.hballp.com. And you can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Hand of the Law. Thank you for tuning in. and stay stylish.